with Coker is a healthcare business podcast from the Coker Group that focuses on solutions to help healthcare organizations effectively navigate the changing healthcare industry landscape.
Welcome to Coffee with Coker. We appreciate you all listening. And this episode, we're talking about something we actually have not talked about before. With us today is Max Reiboldt, who is president and CEO of the Coker Group, who has been on before. And we have Tom Anthony, who is an attorney with Brown Todd. Tom, you've been on the podcast before, or we've co-authored content before, but Tom, I appreciate you joining us.
Glad to be here. Yes, I've been on before, Coffee with Coker, and delighted to be part of it. Thank you.
We appreciate you taking the time. And today what we're talking about is a topic that, like I said, we have not really covered specifically before, but it's something we're seeing more of, and that's Gainsharing, which is kind of maybe a familiar term for some. It may be kind of a unfamiliar and new term for others, and it may be even for others yet something that they've heard in the past but haven't heard in a while. But this is something that we're seeing more and more, specifically as it relates to physician alignment transactions and different affiliation models, which of course there are a variety of those. But Gainsharing is one of those things that we wanted to go into specifically, as we are seeing more and more interest in more of these take place. And Tom and his partners there have done a number of these with their clients. Before we do that, real quick, just a couple of admin items. We get questions sometimes about where to find Coffee with Coker and other content from the Coker Group. And you can find all of our episodes at coffeewithcoker.com. You can also subscribe on all of the standard podcast applications. And also at coffeewithcoker.com, you can find our insights. So there's a lot of content that we publish here at Coker, and whether it's articles, white papers, and research reports, and many other things, as well as our podcast, covering a wide range of topics similar to this. So we encourage everybody to subscribe, sign up for our email newsletter, and you'll get regular content in your inbox and updates via social media as well. So thank you all for listening. So let's dive right in. And I'm just going to throw this out there because I think this is one of those topics that, again, as I said in the intro, it may not be as familiar. And even if people are familiar of it in a general sense, may not be very familiar with the nuances of it. And so we wanted to tee this up. And by the way, I probably should have mentioned this, sorry, when we started. This discussion is kind of a teaser to a more in-depth white paper that we will be publishing jointly with Brown Todd, and that will be forthcoming here in the next few weeks after this podcast is released. So the idea here is that we wanted to cover this topic from more of a discussion point of view and perhaps a little higher level, but we also want to let all of our listeners know that this is going to be a topic that's covered in much more detail, and even, perhaps answer some questions. If folks have questions after listening to this, we can address some of those in the article. With that, though, Tom, maybe I'll let you kick it off here. Let's just start by defining, what are we talking about when we say Gainsharing? Is it kind of a single thing? Is it, are there kind of different forms of it? I mean, what is it basically?
Well, thank you, Mark. Gainsharing, like the name implies, is the sharing of gains. And the gains are derived from savings in the cost of healthcare procedures. And the idea is that a hospital and a medical group or physicians will collaborate on devising ways to identify what it costs to provide a particular item of care or a particular type of medical service, and establish a baseline of measures of how that care is delivered and what it costs to deliver it, and then try to improve on that, try to do better. So let's just take, for example, a joint replacement, and let's say that a hip replacement has a typical cost of $40,000. And that amount would include facility fee for the hospital stay. It'll include the prosthetic device that is implanted. It'll include the services of the physicians and other medical personnel who are involved. So you've got a surgeon, maybe another doctor assisting, anesthesiologists, and then various technicians, CRNAs, nurse anesthetists, and others who could assist in the surgery. All of that might lump together to 40,000, and it would require, say, a 5-day hospital stay and some post-op therapy. Well, they might get together and say, well, how can we do better on that? Can we reduce that to $35,000 of total cost and shorten the hospital stay and accelerate the therapy? If we do save that $5,000, can we share that gain? Can we do some gain sharing together? Maybe split it 50-50 between the hospital and the physicians who are involved? That's the theory. And you ask, is there a one kind of thing, or is it a situation where there's multiple opportunities? The sky's the limit, Mark. There are as many different kinds of these arrangements as you can possibly think of in every type of medical care. And the, joint replacement that I mentioned is one obvious one. But there are many, many ways to do this and many different kinds of structures available. So Max, I know you've worked on these arrangements. What kind of arrangements have you seen in the past?
Thanks, Tom. And it's good to be with you today and in this podcast, and always honored to share the podium with you, so to speak. Yeah. Gain sharing, if you've been doing this as long as you and I have, and I'll speak for myself, probably a few more years than maybe even you have, but we're pretty close in terms of our experiential levels. And gain sharing has been around forever, and it seems to have ebbed and flowed in terms of its receptivity. And so, we've seen a number of these, and frankly, over the many years, we've seen a lot of reticence for hospitals in particular. Surgeons and other providers, physician providers related, don't seem to be as averse to it, probably for obvious reasons, but hospitals much more so. And so what I think we'll get into today is a good bit of discussion about sort of this new wave of receptivity and governmental acceptance of gain sharing programs. Now, with that said, there's a lot of rules and guardrails, as they say these days, to assure compliance. But for all intents and purposes, and as a result of an OIG advisory opinion that is now over 3 years old, believe it or not, it was issued in 2017 for the end of the year. Gain sharing is very much appropriate in the context of the very good description that you just gave it. The big adversity that some, and a lot of this is led by attorneys and well thought through attorneys, I might add. But the big issue with it is the question, are we implementing cost saving measures to actually induce or reward surgeons or other physicians' referrals, or to attract those referring physicians? That's really the issue from a legal standpoint, as I boil it down. So yes, it is a very interesting topic. Maybe now's as good a time as any, Tom. I'll throw it to you to discuss a little bit about the fraud and abuse and anti-kickback statutes that I know you know so well, and how it might relate to gain sharing or not. But the advisory opinion I referred to basically concludes that that's not happening. That anti-kickback statute violation could happen, but we think, meaning the OIG thinks, that the pros outweigh the cons or the risk of that. So they basically have given it a thumbs up. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, and Tom, as you're responding to that, maybe one of the things that I would love to hear from you on, my understanding, very limited understanding of the advisory opinion kind of logic, is thinking through balancing out or countering issues around anti-kickback statutes is the quality piece and the importance of that. So maybe if you don't mind, as you're walking through some of this that Max just mentioned, you don't mind, address that quality piece as well.
Well, sure. Happy to do it. And for the benefit of the listening audience, these advisory opinions are issued periodically by the government, and you can look them up on your computer or laptop, whatever you're using to search the internet. It's the Department of Health and Human Services. It's Medicare, CMS, Centers for Medicare, Medicaid Services, and then the Office of Inspector General, the OIG. And it is the Office of Inspector General, that's the lawyers for Medicare, will periodically consider requests from physicians and hospitals for an opinion on a proposed arrangement. And they'll issue these advisory opinions, these letter opinions saying, well, given these facts, the proposal is okay, you can do that, as Max just described for this gain sharing arrangement, or no, it's not okay. Go to jail, do not pass go, do not collect $200. That's a bad way to go on these. So you can, if you apply for an advisory opinion, you do risk getting a negative result. But in this one, they got a positive result. And what they proposed to do was establish a baseline of measures for a particular, in this case, neurosurgical arrangement, and then try to improve upon it. And as Mark and Max both said, it's focused on quality. It has to really deliver better quality for the patient. And as a corollary, going right with that, maybe save some money. Now, the big holdup for gain sharing prior to Advisory Opinion 17-9, which is the 9th one issued in 2017, the big holdup was that it is strictly illegal to pay someone to withhold care, to not give care. It's illegal to do that. And gain sharing, which proposes to reduce the cost of care, could easily lead to reducing the delivery of care. And that was really the big obstacle to gain sharing in the past. Now, in this case, as Max has pointed out, this one was approved. And it was approved because not only was it found to not withhold care, it in fact encouraged the delivery of care, but it also paid all parties involved appropriately for that delivery of better quality, more efficient healthcare. And that was really the key. Higher quality, more efficient care. And that combines to equate, in this case, to fair market value. And that was determined to be lawful.
How is that, when you say to pay them appropriately, what's the distinction there? Is there a formula, or is there some sort of kind of recommendation as far as what that looks like? I know earlier you even mentioned the split, or are you talking about more on the front end, meaning the actual reimbursement that's received for those certain services that can be then shared in the gains?
Well, within the anti-kickback statute and Stark and other healthcare laws that are not mentioned in this advisory opinion and not so directly applicable to gain sharing, but under AKS, under the anti-kickback statute, it is necessary for all payments to hospitals, physicians, all providers to be fair market value. And fair market value has a definition very similar to what the IRS has used for almost a century. It's an appropriate payment negotiated between parties at arm's length, taking into account all the facts and circumstances. Our law firm, we're not valuation experts, but I believe Coker Group is. And it's probably more for you to talk about, Max, than me. What is fair market value in healthcare? It is necessary. I can tell you that. It is absolutely necessary in order to be legally compliant. But what is it? Max, I have to give that one to you.
Well, again, yes, fair market value in terms of compensation to physicians, particularly from hospitals, has tremendous relevance. And there are industry benchmarks that we use and compare to get to a certain metric or percentile of fair market value. And oftentimes it is tied to productivity. But in these days, as we're moving more and more, ever so seemingly slightly, to quality-based incentives and compensation, we're now incorporating those into the equation to get to and derive fair market value, and even the term commercially reasonable as such too. In the context of gain sharing, what I find interesting is that the advisory opinion of the OIG that we keep referring to really acknowledges that you can have both. You can have, and in fact, compensate physicians at fair market value for both. And what I mean by that is, on the one hand, you can maintain quality and patient care at very high levels while you are focusing and compensating the physicians that have a lot to do with cost containment. So you can compensate them or share in the gain, if you will, through cost savings, but you have to continue to keep both balls in the air. So quality has to be out there in the forefront. If you don't have quality and maintain that, then you cannot share in the gain of the cost savings. But now, realistically, whether it's in a fair market value context or just regular common sense, if you will, it makes a lot of sense. And it's a little different concept and mindset than what we've been used to over the years coming from the government. And I think that's one of the reasons why they've been somewhat schizophrenic on this whole concept of gain sharing over the last 20, 25 years. It's not a new concept. It's been around forever, but at varying times, the perspective of the government has been quite different. Right now, the pendulum has swung more so to, yes, it's okay. No, it's not a violation of the anti-kickback statute, but you have to maintain these standards of quality. You cannot withhold care. All has to be in total compliance. And this advisory opinion, I think, actually does a very good job with this example of the neurosurgeons of explaining how you maintain compliance. But yeah, fair market value is a term that certainly is overarching that we would apply here. But it's not just going to the MGMA benchmark and saying, well, this is what it is, because oftentimes we're talking about cost savings inside the hospital, the OR. So it's not really applied to the practice per se, more than it is, or as much as it is the hospital. So clearly a lot of hoops to jump through. And I'll just say, and maybe this will tee up some further discussion, one of the clients that Tom and I are currently working on together, developing a program, obviously shall remain nameless and all, but the health system that is the target of the gain sharing program in partnership with the surgeons is, let's just say, slow to respond. And I personally think, Tom, that it's due to all these issues and all these hoops you've got to jump through, notwithstanding the advisory opinion. So,
well, yeah, I think as we talk through some of this, I think it's probably safe to say, and nothing revolutionary to say, that the thing, probably the biggest thing, and correct me if I'm wrong, the biggest thing that has kind of opened up the acceptance to this, the approval to this as a model, is the injection of that quality piece that perhaps wasn't there in the past, or at least there wasn't as much of an emphasis, or maybe, even in times past, providers weren't in a position to even be able to measure quality as well, perhaps, as they can today, and tie that to cost savings as well. And I'll just say the white paper will go into even further depth on some of the legal and regulatory considerations for folks to be aware of and to think about, particularly as you're considering in your example, Max, the hospital's legal counsel may be trying to work through some of those weeds, but that actually strikes up a thought for me in that if you're on the hospital side, even if you're legal counsel advising hospitals, or on the physician provider side, a group side of things, and considering the legal ramifications there, not just legal, but financial and other, any kind of suggestions or recommendations, considerations, whatever it may be that you all have that groups and or hospitals should be aware of, even at a high level, if this potentially is a appropriate model for them?
I can tee this up for Tom real quick. And again, I'm referring to this advisory opinion largely, Tom. But it looks to me like there still is a lot of hoops to jump through and a lot of stuff to set up. The advisory opinion talks about a subsidiary being formed, talks about a program oversight committee or words to that effect, a program administrator, obviously a methodology for monitoring and tracking the expenses and the cost savings, a modem or model, I should say, for which physicians are involved and which ones aren't. So I'll stop there, but it still seems like there's a lot of hoops to jump through from a regulatory standpoint. And perhaps that's why hospitals are reticent to, it's the old adage, is it more trouble than it's worth, so to speak.
Well, and it's not only setting up the infrastructure, but ensuring that there's no holes and gaps left that, could expose
absolutely
risk areas.
Well, that's all true. There is an upfront cost to establish these. The hoops you mentioned, Max, are very much there. And what they are designed to do is to build those guardrails that you described earlier. If you set up the limits, the guardrails, the outside limits appropriately, and keep all the payments and all the activities inside those guardrails, inside the arrangements that are proven to be appropriate and are identified as lawful within the advisory opinion and other applicable rules and regs, then it's safe. So some of those hoops, like the LLC you mentioned, those are designed to create a barrier between the physicians who are directly involved in the gain sharing program and other physicians in that same medical group who are not involved, to assure that the money goes to the people doing the work and to assure that fair market value compensation is paid to those people doing the work, and that administrative expenses are segregated from those and paid to the parties that are providing the administrative services and so on. If you think about how to put these together, the core, the heart and soul of the gain sharing arrangement is a thorough analysis by the hospital and by the physicians with good advisors of each element of a particular medical procedure or event or service that relates to care. And then they identify, say, the 5 most important parts and look at each of those and say, how can we improve the outcome? How can we improve the care to the patient on those 5 parts of this? And then, does that lead to cost saving? Does that lead to efficiency? So I mentioned it earlier, a hip replacement. So when the hospital and the physicians look at it and they say, okay, what happens in a typical hip replacement surgery? The physician comes to the operating room. They do the timeout. They mark the right side, the site. They go in. On the table are all the different tools and implants and things they're going to need in the surgery. And they walk over to the table and they look and they see there are 3 possible implants that might be used, all for the same purpose, made by different manufacturers. And to be sure they're ready at the instant they're needed, the physician rips open all 3 packages and then picks one and uses it for the implant. What happens to the other 2? They're no longer sterile. Throw them away. How efficient is that?
Yeah.
Well, maybe there's a better way to do it. So, you pick out the 5 key items, and 5 is an example, could be 7, could be 10, could be 3. Focus on those, deliver high quality care as efficiently as you can, and that's a path to success. Yes, it's hard to set up initially, takes some work, but it can lead to great things for patients.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Tom, because as we were walking through some of the requirements and legal / regulatory considerations, it did seem like, wow, this could be quite a few hoops to jump through and even burdensome just to figure out where to get started. But once you get that initial infrastructure and those processes set up, I think it actually could go towards significant improvements in efficiency, even beyond the way it's been done in the past. I mean, I know that's the objective, and I can see how it works. Because in that case, in your example, the 3 different implants that are out there, it's not as though they're sitting there saying there's price tags on those and they're making a decision based on that. They're making the decision that they would have made otherwise. They're just not wasting 2 other ones in the process. And that, to me, seems, I mean, again, it's kind of an obvious statement here. It seems extremely wasteful. That's waste that should be eliminated regardless. And if it can be eliminated under one of these types of structures, then yes, that's significant improvement beyond the way it was done in the past.
That's all true, and yet you can also understand why the old fox in the hen house adage might apply here too. And that's why the government expects us to both monitor and document thoroughly any particular gain sharing program that's implemented. Moreover, and I don't know, Tom, exactly if you feel that a gain sharing program has a limited life, but many that I've personally dealt with, and or even again referring to this advisory opinion, it's fairly specific in saying that the one that was advised upon is a 3-year time frame of savings. Moreover, you have to really revisit it every year, and your baseline for year 2 is based on year 1, and year 3 it's based on year 2. So it's always a moving and perhaps much more challenging baseline target upon which to generate the savings. And so there are a lot of requirements still to a successful gain share program, but yet, as we've tried to point out, both sides of the fence, so to speak, it certainly has a lot of value in the process. I personally think one of the issues is the volume of dollars that we're dealing with. Let's just take your total joint example again. Let's say collectively we have a hospital that does fairly conservatively 300 total joints a year. Now that's every surgeon. That's not just one, of course, but roughly one a day, work day. And that's not that much, particularly as prominent as total joints are. If the cost of that total joint, as you referred to, and I think you were pretty accurate, is $40,000, and let's just even make the math easy and call it 50, and we did 300 total joints. That if my math is accurate, I believe that's $15 million of cost. That's not insignificant, even for a larger, medium-sized hospital doing 300 total joints a year. Now, if we can save 5% of that number, it's a pretty significant number. And then if we give half of that through the proper course of action back to the surgeons, the hospital may well say, well, great, we saved $750,000. We gave half of it back to the physicians, and that cut into our very limited margins. Is that really in the best instance or situation of the hospital? And to be perfectly honest, it's a valid question. I'll leave it open-ended, and Tom or Mark, I'll let you pick up on it further. But maybe my example is too far-fetched and not accurate, but what's your thoughts?
Well, it's not far-fetched at all. It's exactly what Mark was saying earlier. It's really about quality, and the efficiency and the monetary savings are outcomes. They're secondary to improving quality of care to the patient. So the financial incentive is there, but it's not the primary goal here. The primary goal is better care, and that usually is the outcome of a gain sharing arrangement. And as Max pointed out in your earlier comment here, they fizzle out. The bar keeps moving up and up and up, and the ability to exceed the bar becomes less and less and less. So after a year, it's changing, and after 3 years, it's probably evaporated altogether, and you need to move on, need to evolve and find other ways and other measures and other things to think about. But Mark, I think it comes back to your first comment about quality of care being the real goal of a gain sharing arrangement.
Yeah. And to your point, Tom, the financial incentives are there, which I think we found that are very important, but they do not come by any means before or at a cost of quality. And I think also the way that they fizzle out, I think is an extremely important point for people to understand, because they kind of, from what I hear, they kind of they run their cycle, they live their life, and they aren't naturally gaining anymore. So I think that could be significant in terms of preventing these things from becoming too big, becoming these black holes of stuff that can't be tracked as well, or that, kind of becomes a little less, goes in the wrong direction or goes into a negative direction over time, as sometimes, as we've seen in the past, other types of models have. I think these kind of self-regulate, I guess, is the point, and I think that's important. Tom, one thing I thought of, I was going to ask you that we don't have to go into great depth here, but I think it may be of interest. When you talked about the subsidiary, the LLC that's created, is that a joint venture, or what is the typical kind of structure of that, and what's some of the kind of breakdown? Is there one typical way?
Yeah, there's literally 1,000 ways to do it, but the joint venture LLC is the most common. And the limited liability company LLC structure is very popular because it's so flexible. It's extremely easy to set up. It has good tax aspects to it, in that both parties it's sort of invisible for tax purposes, and in some ways it has its own tax return, but otherwise, not a lot of tax effect to the structure. And like the name implies, it gives a certain degree of limited liability. So that's good as well. And I would say, of all the gain sharing arrangements we've worked on and known about, it's probably like 80% of them are set up as limited liability companies that are jointly owned by the hospital and the physicians who are involved.
Yeah, that's helpful. Well, this has been extremely helpful. Again, we could literally go on and talk about this topic, the advisory opinion, and some of the other things that you all have worked on with clients on this topic for hours. And as I said, we are going to go into much more depth in the white paper that will cover these things we've talked about today in more detail, but other things as well that we didn't have time to get to. But I did want us to just tee this up, because again, I know folks are interested in this. They're becoming more aware of it, and it is proving to be an extremely attractive and effective model, not only from a financial opportunity standpoint, but again, just continuing to inject quality and encourage higher quality in these affiliation models between hospitals and physicians. So I'll leave it there, but we will absolutely be talking about this topic in more depth in the very near future. We definitely want to keep our audience updated on that. But Tom and Max, I greatly appreciate you taking a few minutes to just give us this high level rundown. And again, we'll look forward to talking about it more in the near future.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
We hope you enjoyed that episode of Coffee with Coker, and we thank you for listening. We want to encourage all of our listeners to participate and contribute in the podcast. So if you have any questions on any of the things we discussed in this episode, any of the topics that were presented, please feel free to ask us. Also, we welcome your feedback and suggestions. If you have any ideas related to the material we discussed in this episode, or in any episode, please let us know and we'll make sure to incorporate it. And if you have ideas for topics you'd like to hear more information about in future episodes, please send those suggestions to us. We would love to hear them and we'd love to incorporate them into our future episodes. You can find us online and on social media. Start with our website, and specifically the podcast is coffeewithcoker.com. You can also find that through the main Coker website at cokergroup.com. You can also find us on social media, Twitter at Coker Group, and then on LinkedIn, you can search for Coker Group and find our page and the page for some of our team members as well there. So you can find us and reach out to us in a number of places. And then if you want to contact us directly, one of the best ways to do that, email feedback@cokergroup.com. That's feedback@cokergroup.com. And again, we'd love to get your feedback. And we'd love to encourage everyone to subscribe to the podcast so that you can be notified when future episodes are released. We look forward to the next episode, and we look forward to getting your suggestions and feedback on this episode. Thanks for listening, and we look forward to speaking with you again on future episodes.